standing on the stairs. She laughs as she glares into the guest room upstairs, and she quickly moves down to the parlor. And if you're very quiet, a muffled sob fills the night when she whispers, "You disappointed me, Father." Without saying any more, she glides out the door to the barn and then up to the loft. She has sinkers to find. Or is it a piece of iron this time? Don't get confused, Lisbeth of Maplecroft. When next she appears, different clothes she wears. Was it a bloody dress she was bearing? But her arms are stained red with the blood that she shed, as are her hands and the hatchet she's carrying.
Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. And when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. You know, I must have been around 7 years old when I first read that verse. The legend of Lizzie Borden had traveled time and distance and culture and found its way to Atwood, Oklahoma, population 60. Although I'd argue that my little town was the cultural center of the universe, some folks might find it incredible that a 100-year-old murder case from New England could be so well known in the hinterlands. But arguably, the Lizzie Borden case is the most famous in American history and folklore, and worldwide only Jack the Ripper is more famous. Now, it's difficult to explain why a case captures the imagination, but the Lizzie Borden case is the thing of which legends are made. So travel along as we go back to 1892, Fall River, Massachusetts, and the legend of Lizzie Borden.
There were no less than 200 Borden families living in Fall River in 1892. Judge Robert Sullivan took liberties with the famous quote when he wrote, "In Fall River, the Durfees and Braytons spoke only to the Bordens, and the Bordens spoke only to God." The house at 92 2nd Street was the home of Andrew Jackson Borden, his wife Abby, and two spinster daughters, Lizzie and Emma. Andrew Borden was a tall, thin man of 72 years. He was tight-fisted and miserly, and his family lived well beneath his means. His first wife, Sarah, had suffered from unusual spells and had died when Lizzie was 2 years old. Abby Durfee, a 37-year-old spinster, was his second wife and stepmother to Lizzie and Emma. A short, heavy-set woman, it was difficult to see what Andrew and Abby saw in each other. Everyone knew that Andrew married Abby because he needed a full-time worker, and Abby needed Andrew's money. Between them, they brought together the two most influential families in Fall River, the Durfees and the Bordens. The Bordens' house was not the palatial estate that their name suggested. Although Andrew was very wealthy, the Borden home was as bleak and austere as those in a Dickens novel. They lived near the business district, not on the plateau called the Hill, where the socially elite resided.
It must have been horribly dismal. Yet, to live under those circumstances and know that your father's very rich must have been very irksome. The house itself, and I think this is a real strong evidence of how stingy the man was. If you remember, the 1890s were known as the gaslight era. They didn't have gaslight. They could have had electricity. They didn't have running water. They didn't have toilets. They didn't have a bathtub. And in the 1890s, middle-class people had those. And certainly people in his financial condition could have had that and a lot more. They had hand pumps. They had a pump in the kitchen. They had a pump in the barn. They had water closet in the basement. The toilet arrangement in the basement is what I would call an indoor outhouse. And there was a big pot in the basement into which rags, dirty rags, were thrown. Lizzie had a maid to talk to. Bridget was a pleasant, sort of outgoing Irish woman in her mid-20s. Emma was very quiet and very reserved.
And you would have had two environments, the working class people and the upper crust society. Lizzie Borden was trapped between these two societies because her father was a miser and they lived in the working class society. And she always wanted to achieve the ultimate goal of climbing the fashionable hill and living with the upper crust.
Perhaps symptomatic of a darker, more sinister side, Ms. Lizzie Borden had another problem. She was also a petty thief.
Lizzie would go to McQuarrie's and shoplift. It was so well known that the clerks would watch her, make a list of what she stole, send Andrew the bill, and he would pay for it.
The daughters were jealous of their stepmother and looked upon her as an interloper and a threat to their inheritance. Lizzie especially exhibited a brooding hatred with sudden outbursts of hostility towards her stepmother. After an argument over property rights 5 years before, Lizzie no longer called Abby mother, but rather Mrs. Borden. The older daughter, Emma, was 42 years old and still lived at home. She was dominated by everyone around her, especially her headstrong younger sister. On the other hand, Lizzie Andrew Borden had inherited her father's name and his chilly disposition. She was red-haired, bright, ill-tempered, and arrogant. At 32 years, she felt life was passing her by. With a sizable allowance of $4 a week, she despised her father's miserly ways. On any given day, you could see Andrew Borden dressed in morning clothes, making his daily rounds, personally collecting rents, while at the same time selling eggs from a basket that hung from his arm. The only jewelry he wore was a gold pocket watch and a small gold ring that Lizzie had given him. Mr. Borden always stopped at his 3 banks and the newly completed A.J. Borden building. The hot, muggy morning of August 4th, 1892 was little different from others. But the previous day had been a day of unusual events. It had begun when Abby Borden paid an unscheduled visit to Dr. S.W. Bowen.
Members of the family had been sick recently. Mrs. Borden came to me Wednesday morning and said that she was very much frightened, for she thought she had been poisoned. She and Mr. Borden had vomited all night, and she feared the poison had been from the baker's bread or the milk. Miss Lizzie and Bridget had been sick with the same symptoms, and it was their belief that an enemy had attempted to kill the whole family.
Later the same morning, Lizzie visited a drugstore and attempted to buy a deadly poison from druggist Eli Bentz.
This party came in and inquired if I kept prussic acid. I informed her that we did. She asked me if she could buy 10 cents worth, and I says, well, my good lady, it is something we don't sell unless by prescription from a doctor, as it is very dangerous to handle. I understand she wanted to put it on a sealskin cape.
Lizzie's unusual conduct continued during an evening visit to her friend Alice Russell.
During the evening, Lizzie came to see me. She came alone and stayed till about 9 o'clock. She spoke of her father and mother and her being sick the night before. Lizzie said, sometimes I think our milk might be poisoned. Mrs. Borden thought she had been poisoned, and she called Dr. Bowen to treat her. Lizzie spoke about believing her father had enemies and spoke of a man who came there and wanted to rent a place and of a quarrel. Then Lizzie said to me, I am afraid somebody will do something. I don't know, but what somebody will do something.
After Lizzie returned home from Miss Russell's, she found that her Uncle John Morse was staying the night at the house. Emma was visiting friends in Fairhaven and would be gone a week or so. That night, a neighbor was awakened by a cracking of wood from the fence on the Borden property. It continued for 4 or 5 minutes. Then it stopped, and the house on 2nd Street slept.
Country lawyer Lizzie Borden will continue.
UPI says It's an exciting, profound, and moving adventure. Mustang, The Hidden Kingdom, Monday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on the Discovery Channel.
Even with dual airbags, power windows, air conditioning, and cruise control, the Mazda 626's best feature may be the Mazda personal lease. Flexible terms, little down, low monthly payments. And that's something you can take to the bank. Lease a 626DX for just $199 a month with $1,000 down.
Now there's a petroleum card unlike any other that gets what you need at more than 13,000 locations. It's the Citgo Plus card, and you can use it anywhere you see the Citgo sign. And because it's the industry's fastest growing card, it can unlock the power of America's fastest growing oil company. It takes one little card to get this kind of convenience. It's the Citgo Plus card, the petroleum card.
Big news for your stomach. Once, no matter the ailment, most stomach remedies were gritty, goopy, soupy, separated, chalky, crusty, messy, bitter, or a bother. But time marches on. Introducing Pepto-Bismol caplets. They're easy to swallow and start to coat in seconds for a taste-free way to comfort indigestion, upset stomach, or diarrhea. New Pepto-Bismol caplets, the little pill that's big news for your stomach.
From Hollywood Pictures, critics are declaring Quiz Show the best American movie this year. USA Today gives it 4 stars. Siskel and Ebert give it 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. Gene Siskel calling it one of the year's very best movies.
Everybody got the answers but you.
Quiz Show will win a mantelpiece full of Oscar nominations.
If someone offered you all this money, would you do it?
It's a sure contender for Best Picture of the Year. Quiz Show, rated PG-13. Now playing in select cities. Check newspaper for showtimes.
Imagine hearing for the deaf, cooking with your computer. How? Watch Invention, followed by Next Step. Right here, Tuesday nights beginning at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, only on the Discovery Channel.
One moment our kids are in their room across the hall. Next moment they're across the country. Is it lonely for them? Exciting? As parents, we want them to call home as easily as they used to call us from the backyard.
AT&T announces True Ties. It's an affordable personal 800 number for your home, so loved ones can call you freely and you pay for the call. A True Ties 800 number costs just $4.50 a month plus usage. Call now and you'll get 20% off all your 800 calls. Sign up today. Call 1-800-ATT-TIES extension 6.
Giving our kids our 800 number says, you're far away, but hey, we're still within earshot.
Sign up for your True Ties personal 800 number today. Call 1-800-ATT-TIES. Call now and you'll get 20% off all your 800 calls. With True Ties, your kids are free to call you anytime.
The real you coming through, your true voice.
Country lawyer Lizzie Borden now continues.
Last morning of their lives, Andrew and Abby Borden came down around 7 a.m., followed by Uncle John Morse. Bridget, Abby, and Andrew were nauseated, but managed to eat a hearty breakfast of cold mutton, mutton soup, bananas, Johnny cakes, and coffee. This was the 3rd day the mutton had been served, and the 3rd meal in a row. Mr. Borden and Mr. Morse left shortly after 9. Lizzie rarely took meals with Abby and Andrew. She simply refused to honor them with her presence. Soon she came down, stayed a few minutes without eating breakfast, and disappeared for an hour or so.
I saw my mother when I was downstairs. She was dusting the dining room. She said she had been upstairs and made the bed, and was going upstairs to put on the pillow slips. That was the last time I saw her alive. Lizzie Borden.
Abby walked up the stairs shortly after 9. She never walked back down. Somewhere in the house, someone waited. The doors were kept locked, and Bridget Sullivan washed windows outside for an hour or so, and then moved inside.
A little before 11, I heard Mr. Borden try to get in at the front door. Miss Lizzie was upstairs at that time. I went to open the door and it was locked, and I made some exclamation and Lizzie laughed aloud. I heard her tell her father that Mrs. Borden got a note and went out. I wasn't feeling well, so I went upstairs to my room and lay down. In a few minutes, Lizzie hollered for me. She hollered loud. "Maggie, come down quick. Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." She told me to run after Dr. Bowen, who lived across the street.
I saw Bridget Sullivan going to Dr. Bowen's house and appeared frightened. I looked out to the Borden house and saw Lizzie Borden standing inside the screen door. I asked her what was the matter. She said, "Somebody has killed Father. Oh, do come over." I went over and went into the house. I put my hand on her arm and said, "Oh, Lizzie, where is your father?" She said, "In the sitting room." I said, "Where were you?" She said, "I went out to the barn to get a piece of iron." And in a few moments, Dr. Bowen came. Mrs. Adelaide B. Churchill.
I hurried across the street and entered the house by the side door. Alone, I walked into the sitting room, and there I saw the body of Mr. Borden on a lounge. His position was perfectly natural, and he appeared as if he had just lain down to sleep. I was impressed at this point with the manifest absence of any sign of a struggle. I am satisfied that he was asleep when he received the first blow, which was necessarily fatal. The cuts extended from the eye and nose around the ear. In a small space, there were at least 11 distinct cuts of about the same depth and general appearance. In my opinion, any one of them would have proved fatal almost instantly. Physician that I am, and accustomed to all kinds of horrible sights, but it sickened me to look upon the dead man's face. I am inclined to think that an axe was the instrument used. There was some blood on the floor and spatters on the wall, but nothing to indicate the slaughter that had taken place. At this point, I returned to the kitchen and inquired for Mrs. Borden. Miss Lizzie replied that she did not know where her mother was.
Mrs. Churchill volunteered to go upstairs with Bridget. Before they reached the landing, they could see a body in the guest room. They ran back down the stairs and told Dr. Bowen.
Mrs. Churchill suggested that I go upstairs, which I did, entering the front room. As I passed within, I was horrified to see the body of Mrs. Borden on the floor. I think she must have been engaged in making the bed when the murderer appeared with an axe or hatchet and made a slash at her. After that, she turned, and the fiend chopped her head as if it had been a cake of ice. One blow killed the woman, but the murderer kept on hacking at her until he was satisfied that she was dead. I easily made out 11 distinct gashes of apparently the same size as those on her husband's face. In my judgment, the dead woman did not struggle.
So far as I know, I was alone in the house the larger part of the time while my father was away. I was eating a pear when my father came in. Then I went to the barn to get some lead for a sinker. I went upstairs in the barn. There was a bench there which contained some lead. I unhooked the screen door when I went out. I ate some pears up there. I picked the pears from the ground. Lizzie Borden.
Lizzie Borden would tell conflicting versions of where she was and what she was doing when the murders occurred. The barn loft was examined. The dust on the floor had not been disturbed, and it appeared no one had been in the loft for some time. Was she looking for sinkers or a piece of iron to fix a screen? Was she in the backyard or in the loft? She would also say she heard a groan from the house and ran inside and discovered her father. Then she said she heard a scraping sound. And finally she said she heard no sound or noise at all. Lizzie's behavior was curious, and to a few who dared to think it, even suspicious. As the news swept through Fall River, thousands gathered before the Borden house. City Marshal Rufus B. Hilliard and District Attorney Hosea Knowlton found themselves in the most thankless job of their lives.
First of all, I think the Borden crime was the first murder in American history to be covered by the electronic media. You got to give me the telegraph. But it was telegraphed around the country very quickly. Newspapers picked it up in New York and Philadelphia and Boston almost immediately. The news was broadcast as rapidly as one can imagine.
I asked Lizzie Borden if she thought that Bridget could have done this, and she said that she didn't think that she could or did. She said no, that Bridget had gone upstairs previous to her father's lying down in the lounge, and when she came from the barn, she called her downstairs. I then asked her if she had any idea who could have killed her father and mother, and she said, "She's not my mother, sir. She's my stepmother. My mother died when I was a child." Deputy John Fleet.
The newspapers chose Uncle John Morse as the prime suspect. The suggestion would almost cost his life. His whereabouts were verified with absolute certainty. That left only Lizzie. But Fall River's social elite were not capable of such a crime. It was, after all, unladylike. And what about everyone's target and the bottom step of the social ladder? The Portuguese.
Dear Mr. Knowlton, it is very clear that the Portuguese love money. For while all liars are not murderers, all murderers are liars for sale. Anonymous.
By afternoon, the Borden house was crawling with policemen, reporters, officials, and thousands of sightseers, and everyone offered advice.
Dear sir, why don't you consult a competent phrenologist and ascertain if either of the members of the Borden family suspected of murder of A.J. Borden has a formation of head which would tend to murder under favorable conditions. No man or woman deliberately plans or executes a murder without having the organs which inspire murderous inclination largely developed. Very truly, M.T. Richardson.
Dear sir, why not clear up this dreadful mystery by an examination of the retina of the eye of one or both of the murdered parties if either were conscious at the time of the murder? The last object seen by them will be found impressed there. Dark, mysterious cases have been brought to light in this manner by the means of photography. Respectfully, a detective.
The police found several axes and hatchets in the Borden home. One hatchet found in a box by the furnace was more curious than the others. The handle had been recently broken off, and the head appeared to have been washed and covered with ashes. Incredibly, the policeman returned the hatchet to the box and left it. 5 days later, another officer rediscovered it and took it as possible evidence. While standing in the parlor, District Attorney Knowlton made an interesting discovery. On a small table was a very interesting book.
They had what we would call a medical book. And the spine was broken so that if you dropped it on a table, it would automatically open up to wherever the spine had been broken to. And that page listed a description of prussic acid and what it could do.
Country lawyer Lizzie Borden will continue.
I work on a boat on the Seine in Paris, and this is the lost and found. Paris is like champagne, it goes straight to your head. So it's no wonder people lose things. We find the bags, and wallets, cameras, backpacks. A shoe falls out of the... Usually we find not much inside. There's a very special feeling in Paris. The history. Do you know Louis XVI? Even he lost something. His head.
American Express traveler's checks. Don't leave home without them.
Hold that plane!
Last call, Flight 17.
This'll work. Call Mike.
Everyone should now be on board, miss.
Coming! Call Lois. Call accountant.
Call Sprint for the voice-activated phone card, the easiest calling card in the business.
Now that everyone is here,
come, people will remember the first time they saw an aurora. And you'll be one of the lucky ones who can say that when Aurora was ready to go, so were you. See what happens when you demand better? Aurora by Oldsmobile.
The Discovery Channel invites you on a journey few have ever taken to a kingdom few have ever seen. Travel with a special envoy of the Dalai Lama across the Himalayas in search of the last stronghold of true Tibetan culture. Don't miss this 2-hour world premiere special, narrated by Harrison Ford. Mustang, The Hidden Kingdom, Monday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on the Discovery Channel. Compelling.
There are 32 civil wars now in the world.
Controversial.
The American people are being sold out.
Captivating.
The idea of going to Mars is crazy.
Cronkite.
These are the issues which concern every American.
Explore your world and the issues that shape it. The Cronkite Report. Lessons for the future. Educators challenging the system.
Tuesday at 10 Eastern, 9 Central on the Discovery Channel.
Country lawyer Lizzie Borden now continues.
Hard reality was slowly soaking in. Every member of the household had an ironclad alibi except Lizzie. The unthinkable was now considered. Except in whispers, no one had courage to pose the question, did Lizzie Borden murder her father and stepmother? That afternoon, one of the more macabre events took place in the Borden home. Shortly after 3 o'clock, the doctors placed wicker, muslin cloth, and canvas on the dining table, and the bodies were autopsied. It was determined that Abby was killed about 9 o'clock that morning, and Andrew 1 or 2 hours later. In other words, Abby was dead at the time Lizzie was explaining her stepmother's absence. After darkness fell on the House of Locks, John Morse slept without a lamplight in the same room where Mrs. Borden had been hacked to death a few hours before. Lizzie and Emma, who had returned from Fairhaven, also slept without a light, as did Miss Russell, who slept in Mr. and Mrs. Borden's room.
It says something about Lizzie and says something about Emma. I mean, let's face it, if Emma didn't do it, if Lizzie didn't do it, Bridget didn't do it, then there was some lunatic out there with an axe who could reappear. And yet there seemed to be no fear of that.
Andrew and Abby's bloody clothes had been removed and taken to the cellar. Their bodies still lay on the dining room table. Shortly after midnight, a policeman observed Emma and Lizzie going down to the basement. Lizzie was carrying a slop pail, and Emma held the light. Lizzie disappeared into the darkness and returned a short time later. Police never questioned them about the incident. The bodies lay in the dining room for another 2 days until the August heat demanded burial. A couple of nights after the murder, Uncle John, who had been named as a suspect by several newspapers, tried to sneak out of the Borden house to go to the post office. He was recognized by some of the thousands that were gathered there. A lynch mob of 1,000 or so surrounded him, but miraculously, he was saved by police.
I sent for officers to clear the street, and then the mayor and I saw Lizzie and Emma and Mr. Morse in the parlor. Mayor Coughlin asked that the members of the family remain in the house for a few days, and he offered to them police protection and suggested that they send persons for the mail rather than go to the post office for it. Lizzie then said, "What? Is there anyone suspected in this house?" Mayor Coughlin then said, "Well, I regret very much to say, Miss Borden, but you are suspected." With that, Miss Emma spoke up and said, "We have tried to keep it from her as long as we could."
The funeral took place on the morning of August 6th. The bodies were laid in 2 black cloth-covered caskets in the sitting room where Mr. Borden was killed. The bodies of the victims were laid in the caskets with the mutilated portions of the head turned down so that the cuts could not be noticed. Lizzie stood beside her father's coffin, sobbed, and kissed him on the lips. The funeral was private. That is, only a very few of the immediate friends were asked to accompany the remains to the cemetery. But from 11 o'clock until 11:30, when the funeral procession of 11 hacks and 2 hearses started on its way, there were immense crowds of people lining every sidewalk. As the procession winded its way along North Main Street, many old associates of Mr. Borden were seen to raise their hats. During the afternoon, medical examiners held another autopsy on the bodies of the murdered people at the receiving vault. The doctors severed the poor, mutilated heads from both the bodies, and Dr. Dolan took possession of the ghastly objects. The glaring white skulls with great rents where the murderous axe had crushed then were added to Dr. Dolan's collection of evidence, which could not be properly called circumstantial. E.H. Porter.
It occurred to someone 5 days after the murders that the clothes Lizzie wore the day of the murders should be examined for bloodstains. Lizzie obliged and gave authorities a beautiful, clean dress, even though she said she had spent 20 to 30 minutes in a suffocatingly hot loft that was covered in thick dirt and dust. Lizzie hired Andrew J. Jennings, a highly competent Fall River attorney.
Now, it is almost impossible that this frightful work could have been done without the clothes of the person who did it being bespattered with blood. Then came Lizzie Borden, dressed in the same clothes she wore before the killing. This, together with the improbability that any woman could do such a piece of work, makes the suspicion seem altogether irrational.
5 days after the murder, an inquest was held.
Now, an inquest is a judicial proceeding held to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. And it was a formality in the case of the Borden murders. But within a few days of those murders, they had a proceeding called the inquest, and Knowlton examined Lizzie. Her lawyer was there, but not permitted to sit with her. He was outside the room. It was a closed proceeding, which is important in terms of a later event at the trial. But Knowlton took her up and down and over hill and down dale and around corners and back through the side streets of her testimony and nailed her down into about 50 contradictions.
District Attorney Knowlton believed he had what was tantamount to a confession from Lizzie. Now, finally, it was out in the open, and it was on everyone's lips. Lizzie Borden was suspected of killing her mother and father. Lizzie was arrested and jailed in Bristol County, only a short distance from where her ancestor John Borden was jailed in 1684 for refusing to pay taxes.
Of course, Lizzie was incarcerated in the Taunton jail because there was no female matron in the prison here, and they could not incarcerate her with men. There have been questions as to whether or not she was given special privileges. We do know that several very prominent people in this area called on Lizzie, and they brought her little trinkets, little things that she might like. She did not eat prison food, and it's a rather large dinner pail, so apparently had quite an appetite. And if you look at photographs of Lizzie before and after the trial, you'll see that she did put on a considerable amount of weight, and the trial did age her.
The emerging feminist movements and religious organizations attacked the prosecution and persecution of Lizzie Borden.
The hardest thing for me to stand here is the night, when there is no light. They will not allow me a candle to read by, and to sit in the dark all the evenings is very hard. But I do not want any favors that are against the rules. Lizzie Borden.
Massachusetts had not executed a woman since the Revolutionary War. That execution scarred Massachusetts' Puritan conscience to the core. The murderess, Bathsheba Spooner, was hanged in 1778. An autopsy revealed she was 5 months pregnant. She remains the only woman ever executed in the state's history.
Marshall Hilliard. Dear Sir, if the Bordens were murdered by someone in the house, the hatchet could have been concealed on the persons and afterwards hid in the caskets without fear of detection. Try a muzzled bloodhound. unsigned letter.
At a preliminary hearing to determine if there was probable cause to believe Lizzie Borden committed the murders, her attorney, Andrew Jennings, presented a unique, if not prophetic, argument.
This girl has got at most 10 or 15 minutes to commit the crime and conceal the weapon. If she had time to kill her mother and clean the bloodstains from the garments, she did not have time to clean up the evidence of her work downstairs. Is there any smell of burnt clothing? No.
Jennings must have been unaware of an event that Lizzie's friend Alice Russell observed a few days after the murder.
I went in the kitchen and saw Lizzie standing by the stove, Emma by the sink. Lizzie had a dress, and I asked her what she was going to do with it, and Lizzie said she was going to burn it. It was all covered with paint. I said nothing and went out. When I came in the room again, Lizzie was tearing the dress. I said I wouldn't let anybody see me doing that. There were no officers in the house at the time. I said, I'm afraid that's the worst thing you could have done was to burn that dress. I've been asked about your dresses. And she said, why did you let me do it?
Mr. Knowlton, honored sir, it seems strange to me that it has never occurred to anyone that perhaps Lizzie Borden was naked when she committed the murder. She could easily and quickly wash herself. That is my idea, for I think she is the one. Yours respect, Clara Brown, Boston.
Investigators questioned friends and neighbors about the possibility of insanity in Lizzie's family. Fall River was closed-mouthed about the Bordens' private lives.
It wasn't a thing that you talked, general conversation among any of my friends I know at that time. Don't you? I think it's on account of the Borden family. Out of respect for the Borden family, they just dropped the whole thing.
It wasn't until a generation later that the question was pondered.
A few days before the trial of Lizzie Borden, an incredible event took place. The impact it had on the jury of Lizzie Borden was unquestionable. Keep this one fact in mind. In the 275-year history of Fall River, there's been 2 incidents which could be called axe or hatchet murder. The first was the Borden, but the second axe murder took place a couple of days before the jury selection at Lizzie Borden's trial. It sent shockwaves through the city and the county. A local farm girl, one Bertha Manchester, was found hacked to death in her kitchen. Defense attorney Jennings quipped, well, are they going to claim that Lizzie Borden did this too? The quote was printed across the country. Of course, the implication was that the Borden murderer was hacking victims to death while poor Lizzie was rotting in jail. This was the atmosphere in which the Borden jury was selected. The day before the trial, a suspect was arrested, but the news of the arrest was not printed until the following day, and the Borden jury had already been selected and sequestered. In short, they didn't know of the arrest till after they reached their verdict. All they knew was that there was an axe murderer still stalking the streets of Fall River. For what it's worth, the accused was a Portuguese immigrant who had only been in this country for 2 months, making it impossible for him to have killed the Bordens.
Country lawyer Lizzie Borden will continue.
Market took a hit today.
Yes, it's tough out there.
Oh, I don't know. That bar Cheers, it's packed every night. They're doing great.
I'm sure. My mutual fund is being mismanaged. I'm thinking of suing.
Oh, I know a great lawyer.
Really?
Yeah, Matlock.
Matlock?
Okay, he's a little old, but he's never lost a case. Undefeated.
Some people know CNBC is the first place for business news.
Oh, time for hard copy.
And some don't. CNBC, when you're tired of tuning out, tune in.
Golf ball distributor gets urgent order. Customers in Kyoto. She's in LA. Goes to post office. Finds Express Mail International as a smart solution. Doesn't cost much. Golf balls arrive by tea time. Team needs new jerseys. Person has to deliver them overnight. Goes to post office. Finds Express Mail as a smart solution. Guarantees delivery. Jerseys arrive on time. Person avoids getting sacked.
There are good reasons why Ford Taurus is America's best-selling car.
The 220 horsepower, no compromise performance of Taurus SHO. The combination of outstanding design and extra room in Taurus wagon. And the latest addition to the Taurus family, the sporty new Taurus SE. Now there are even more reasons for you to make America's best-selling car your car. 2.9% financing, up to $750 cash back, or special lease terms. Now on Ford Taurus.
In a single year, 93% of our toxic chemical waste was treated, converted to energy, or recycled. What about the other 7%? We're working on it. The 180 members and partners of the Chemical Manufacturers Association, working for change.
In a land ravaged by flood and drought, the cycle of life continues. In Venezuela's Llanos region, crocs and cattle coexist. Cowboys herd a different type of livestock, and the golden rule is adapt or perish. Visit this hostile land of cowboys, caimans, and capybaras on the natural world. Coming up next on the Discovery Channel.
Best wishes in your new life together. Right now, you're not thinking about healthcare. When you do, you may discover your doctor isn't part of your new family coverage. With Choice Care, you can select from among the best doctors in the area or seek care without a referral. Now you can have the benefits of an HMO and a choice. Choice Care, a new generation of healthcare.
When you're ready to buy a new TV, VCR, or camcorder, shop Sun for the biggest selection at the certified lowest prices every day. This adjustable recliner is only $79 when you purchase any big screen from Sun, like this GE 31-inch set with on-screen menus for just $597, or this 46-inch Zenith with surround sound for only $1397. Your savings center for TVs, big screens, video, and much more is Sun TV, where you know you pay less.
Country lawyer Lizzie Borden now continues.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All those having anything to do before the honorable justices of the Superior Court, gather round, give your attention, and you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
The trial of Lizzie Borden began on June 4th, 1893. A three-judge panel was appointed to hear the capital case. 30 additional telegraph lines had been temporarily installed to handle the press coverage.
She was particularly careful over her appearance with fancy hats and brooches and things of that nature, where people thought, as a matter of fact, she wore navy blue, where people thought she should have been wearing black. Everyone wanted to see Lizzie Borden. She was held in the Taunton jail, which was the closest woman facility, and she had to take the train to New Bedford, where the court was held in session, and people would stand by trying to get a glimpse of Lizzie Borden. They wanted to see what she had on that day, if she would look at them, if she would show any emotion, if she would glance, if she would flutter her fan. Every one of her movements were recorded. It was just amazing.
Both sides in this trial were admirably equipped for a battle of the very first class. Knowlton, who prosecuted the case, was a very aggressive, very ambitious, thoroughly prepared and competent, skilled, able prosecutor. He later went on after this case to become the Attorney General of Massachusetts, and he was a master at the technical skills of a good litigating lawyer, a good trial lawyer. But Lizzie had terrific lawyers too. George Dexter Robinson was her principal lawyer, and he had been governor of the Commonwealth. In fact, he had appointed one of the judges, Justin Dewey, who was on the panel of three who sat on the trial. And it was Dewey who gave the charge to the jury. The trial really had everything. It was as dramatic as you can get. At one point, when the question arose whether this handleless hatchet might or might not have been the murder weapon, The forensic scientists cleansed the skulls and brought them into the courtroom. Lizzie was unaware that this was going to happen. And she was sitting in the prisoner's dock, and they brought in the skulls of her mother and father in a case and opened them up and put them in evidence and showed or tried to show whether the hatchet did or did not fit. It was actually inconclusive. And she swooned dead away.
The ensuing publicity over the exhibition predictably outraged the Puritan sensibilities of the time.
Dr. Dolan, sir. Looking over the Boston Herald, I saw an article describing your brutal mutilation of the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Borden. You and General Pillsbury are a disgrace, not only to Massachusetts, but to the whole country. You are not fit to be with decent people. You should be shot like a mad dog. You grave-robbing doctors have dulled the sensibilities of the people by the exhibition of human bodies in court and elsewhere. I presume that if General Pillsbury told you to cut off the heads of the Borden girls, you would do it, you thick-headed idiot. Yours sincerely, John E. Gray.
The prosecution would suffer 2 devastating rulings by the tribunal.
First of all, they kept out the inquest and the inquest testimony. That was the only time Lizzie ever testified, and she contradicted herself quite a bit.
The court excluded that testimony on the grounds that since Lizzie didn't have her lawyer with her in the room when that examination was going on before a judge, it wasn't fair. It was kind of a 1892 version of the Miranda rulings, where you have the right to counsel, and if you don't have the counsel when they're asking you the questions, then the questions don't count.
And secondly, they kept the testimony of Eli Bentz out. Eli Bentz was a pharmacist who swore at the inquest that Lizzie Borden had gone into his pharmacy, and his assistant and one of the other customers felt they recognized her also, to purchase prussic acid.
The prosecution offered the testimony to show that she was of a heart depraved and disposed to murder before the day's events of the following day. The defense argued, no, this is too remote in time and a different method altogether, and the judges bought that, and they excluded the testimony.
The prosecution's case hung by a thread on one piece of damning testimony, the dress-burning incident. The defense countered with a most unlikely tiger, and it came in the form of shy, reclusive Emma Borden.
On Saturday, the day of the search, I saw it hanging in the clothes press near the front entry. I went in to hang a dress, and there was no vacant nails, and I noticed this dress of Lizzie's. Later, I said to my sister, "Lizzie, you have not destroyed that old dress yet. Why don't you?" I next saw the Bedford cord dress Sunday morning, August 7th, after breakfast at about 9 o'clock. I was washing dishes, and I heard Lizzie's voice. I turned around and saw she was standing at the kitchen stove. The dress was hanging on her arm, and she said, "I think I shall burn this old dress up." I said to her, "Why don't you? You'd better do it," or something like that. I can't tell the exact words, but it meant do it. And then I turned back to washing dishes and didn't pay any more attention to her at that time.
George Dexter Robinson appointed one of the judges, Justin Dewey, who was on the panel of 3 who sat on the trial. And it was Dewey who gave the charge to the jury. And a much later justice, Robert Sullivan, who wrote a book about the case, analyzed the charge as a virtual direction to the jury to acquit her.
Gentlemen of the jury, have you agreed upon a verdict?
The jury decided Lizzie Borden's fate within 10 minutes after retiring. They stayed another hour out of courtesy. Lizzie Andrew Borden was found not guilty. Lizzie Borden returned to Fall River. If she thought she would be accepted back into the community, she was mistaken.
The courts delivered that verdict, and legally she had been tried, she was acquitted, and she was innocent of the crime. It was left to her contemporaries in Fall River to deliver their own verdict, and they did, and it was a harsh one. And she was ostracized socially for the rest of her life.
When she went back to church, Central Church was her home church. When they went back, she went back after her acquittal, the people that had pews near her moved away.
Miss Russell, Miss Johnstown, and Miss Borden had been the closest friends, where both had proclaimed their belief in her innocence and had been intimate with her. Now they ceased to declare their faith in her and ceased all intercourse with her. This intercourse was never resumed. Neither would talk, but it appeared as though, no longer convinced of her innocence, they regarded her as possibly, if not probably, guilty.
C.H. Wells. She returned to the house, got rid of it, bought the big house she wanted up in the Highlands, up on French Street, and got what the neighbors considered to be a bit flamboyant. She had maple crofts carved in the top step. They thought that was very déclassé. And she later referred to herself as Lisbeth of Maplecroft.
And I can remember as a child, people would say, look out the window, Lizzie Borden's going out for a ride. Well, I had no idea who Lizzie Borden was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. But I'd look out and see a beautiful carriage going by, driven by beautiful horses with a coachman, and thinking, well, wouldn't it be nice? As I remember, it was only looked like an old lady dressed in black going out for a ride. And I'd think, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a afternoon's ride Sunday afternoon, looking like that? But we knew we couldn't, so it just turned away.
Lizzie Borden remained in Fall River for the rest of her life, never being accepted, but I guess just too proud and stubborn to leave. 5 years after her trial, a warrant was issued for Lizzie Borden's arrest. She'd shoplifted 2 small paintings at an exclusive jewelry store in Providence. A carving in her mantelpiece at Maplecroft seemed to echo her lonely, melancholy existence. It reads simply, "My ain country." It's part of a Scottish verse that some say, in fact, is her confession. Listen to the words carefully. "The green leaf of loyalty is beginning to fall. The bonny white rose, it is withering and all. And I'll water it with the blood of usurping tyranny, and green will it grow in my ain country." Now, it's not hard to believe that Lizzie felt betrayed and that in her mind, she, the white rose, was withering from her father's miserly conduct and her mother's deceit. And only by taking the blood of these tyrants could she grow and flourish in her own country, i.e. Maplecroft. Could be. Lizzie and Emma lived at Maplecroft until 1905, when Emma abruptly moved out. She moved to another city and took an assumed name. They never spoke to each other again. And Lizzie, well, she died at home in 1927. Her sister Emma died 10 days later. Now, before Lizzie died, the story goes, she was seen talking to a little girl. The mother called the child inside and told her, "Don't talk to Lizzie." Of course, the little 7-year-old asked why. And the mother replied, because she wasn't very nice to her parents. Till next time, take care.
From Canada to Mexico, from the windswept shores of the east to the sun-swept shores of the west, see the United States in all its glory on America Coast to Coast. Mondays at 10 Eastern and Pacific on the Discovery Channel.
even with dual airbags, power windows,